I want to start by showing you a picture. That's me leading the procession at the graduation of my seminary in 1996. Despite the odd expression on my face, it was one of the proudest moments in my life, an honor that I shared with my now husband, Andy, the shadowy guy behind the faculty marshal. We had the 2 highest GPAs in that class. And at the time, I thought this was a recognition of my intelligence and my diligence and my hard work, of many late nights and hours trying to understand unfamiliar texts and living through bursts of creativity and constructive contribution. And it was honoring all of that. 2 years later, I sat uncomfortably in a doctoral level seminar in educational theory where my beloved advisor talked on and on about how he found straight A students the most boring to teach. All they wanted to do was find out what he wanted them to say and give it back to them. They wouldn't take risks in their thinking. They wouldn't question or push what he was teaching because they were currying favor. They wouldn't try things they didn't know that they could succeed at. They were, in short, wholly unsatisfactory institutional sheep, not much engaged in any authentic process of becoming educated. I still remember that conversation 20 plus years later because there was a part of it that painfully described a lot of my career as a student up to that point. Among the people that carried that banner at Candler in the years before and after me are a current sitting United Methodist bishop, one who will probably be elected this year, a United Methodist seminary professor, and a vice president of a Presbyterian seminary. They're smart, mostly white women, who know how to navigate institutional policies and powerful people and can perform to expectation with respect within them. My husband might have been the outlier, being inconveniently committed to working for affordable housing for many years, but still an example of the ideals of the institution. The first definition of honor is high respect or great esteem. The second is adherence to a conventional standard of conduct. Blech. Now, as I look back at that picture after 6 more years of grad school and 18 years of teaching at ILIF, I notice other things about the young woman who was holding the banner in that honoring moment. She was on a full scholarship, so she didn't have to take out loans, getting by on part-time jobs. She had come straight out of an undergraduate degree in a liberal arts college, so she knew how to do school and what counted as academic rigor in a classroom. She was listening, reading, and writing in her first language. She didn't have a spouse or children, a mortgage, aging parents to support, crushing student debt from her first degree. She took our good health for granted, had the time to go to the gym. She didn't have a traumatic brain injury or PTSD from childhood abuse or military deployment. She didn't have learning disabilities that made the hard work of graduate school even harder. She didn't carry generational and daily trauma of racism in her body. She was cisgender, arose to heteronormative expectations without much internal contradiction, was called by her preferred pronouns, matched the denominational tradition and cultural and regional identity of the school that she attended, and when she went home for the holidays, largely the people there treated her with respect and warmth. In other words, there were some tough times, but largely she was privileged in almost every way possible and aligned entirely with the expectation and norms of the institution. So what does that honor mean? Every night for the past week, my family has joined other people in our neighborhood howling at 8 p.m. Now, I think this is a grassroots ritual that's a lot about getting out of the house after being stuck there all day, but it's ostensibly created to honor the frontline workers who, along with those they love, are bearing the anxious brunt of this current pandemic. There's a lot of that going around. There are expensive commercials with video montages of essential workers at Amazon and Walmart and Taco Bell and FedEx cheerfully going about their jobs so that our lives can continue in the midst of an outbreak, many of whom don't have access to healthcare. Those frontline heroes and essential workers we know were already working in unsafe conditions before the pandemic are often not paid a living wage. They don't have sick days or can't afford to stay home to care for children who are suddenly out of school. We honor medical workers at hospitals who are running with a bare minimum of beds and without the equipment they need in a massive failure of late-stage capitalism and governmental oversight. There's a suppression of testing and a failure to distribute medical equipment because of optics and politics for profit. So what does honoring mean? As a Christian, I try to follow a religious leader who's attributed with saying things like, the last will be first and the first will be last. He has a great sermon where he named those who would be honored in the kingdom of God. Those who mourn, the meek. He eventually ends with a rousing, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, and blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven." So what does that honor mean? That religious leader served a God who consistently chose younger siblings, who disrupted the established systems of honor to lift up the lowly and the despised, who favored slaves over the Pharaoh, who had a preferential option for the poor in a system that loved the rich as much as we still seem to. So what does honor mean? One of the blessings and curses of theological education is coming to ask questions like these. What are we doing here today? What does it mean to receive academic honors? What if our honors tend to replicate systems of domination and privilege? What if honors are empty words that don't address the material and existential needs of real human bodies? What if honors are about optics, or replicating institutional values, about maintaining hierarchies of power while giving lip service to the folk who are carrying the heaviest burdens in unsafe conditions? Those are all possibilities that we may be enacting today. But here are a few other things that I hope are true. The demonic practices of late capitalism and white supremacy have taught us that honoring operates best in a system of scarcity. Honors only mean something if other people also don't receive them. Some groups rightfully receive honor and accolades, while others suffer indignities that contribute to the heightened glory of the chosen few. Without these practices of distinction between honor and disrespect, honor doesn't mean anything. This leads to actual arguments in faculty meeting where people say things like, "You can't have too many people graduate with distinction, then it doesn't mean anything. It's everyone gets a trophy in Little League." But I think this idea that honor has to be scarce to be meaningful is a lie born of systems of hierarchy and oppression that want to distinguish the minority at the expense of the majority. In chapter 53 of the Rule of St. Benedict, the monastics are instructed on how to honor those who come to them. It goes something like this. All guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ, for he himself will say, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me." Proper honor must be shown to all, especially to those who share our faith and to pilgrims. Now I have to laugh. This example that I chose where all guests are to be honored as the incarnation of God in human flesh, there's still this distinction, right? Especially those who share our faith and our pilgrims. Again, with the distinctions. But no surprise to you who have had a theological education, resources from the tradition are never simple. I do appreciate that later in this passage, there's a recognition that honoring occurs within the structures of inequality and is designed to counteract the natural impulses that maintain those structures. So it says, "Great care and concern are to be shown in receiving poor people and pilgrims, because in them more particularly Christ is received. Our very awe of the rich guarantees them special respect." So here's the thing. Honor is not diminished by offering it effusively and generously. And honor rightfully serves not to perpetuate systems of inequality and injustice, but rather to correct for their sorry existence, to ensure that the practice of esteem and dignity and respect are not reserved for the elect, but are replicated graciously and even more vigorously for those on the underside of systems of distinction in order to dismantle those systems. And so today, I want to honor those of you who have just managed to survive your education at ILIF, because maybe your life was not marked by the kinds of privileges that I carried those long years ago. I want to honor those of you who managed to pull a B+ in a class in a quarter where your childcare regularly fell through, and you had to read Kant and entertain a toddler at the same time. We honor your fidelity to the complex contours of your vocation. I want to honor those of you who fought to grasp complex concepts with a brain that had minimal executive functioning, or that was clouded by the fog of depression, or that was hypervigilant due to past trauma, or that taunted you with the echoes of dismissive, low evaluations and expectations from prior racist and sexist teachers. Your persistence and your effort does not go unnoticed. I want to honor those of you who finished your degree while struggling with underemployment, those who were underpaid or unsupported by generational wealth, who had to spend a lot of your creative and intellectual bandwidth to hustle to just make ends meet, to be sure that you and your loved ones could eat and had shelter and could have health care. We see your achievements in artistry and getting through institutions that were originally designed for the economic elite, who had a lot of leisurely time in which to learn. I want to honor those of you who divorced or ended significant relationships, who lost aging parents and beloved mentors, who lost siblings and loved ones who took their own lives or succumbed to disease, who lost infants before they grew to full term. Those of you whose journeys through this place were marked by grief and losses too personal to name. We honor the depth of your love and the pain of those losses as you walked through the valley of the shadow, even in the midst of this rigorous endeavor. I want to honor those of you who not only studied in a classroom, but also served congregants or clients, patients, customers, students, and children whose needs sometimes took precedence over your academic work. We honor your fidelity and perspective and having to pay attention to what truly mattered in those moments where you had to decide how to invest your time and energy. And finally, I want to honor all of those of you who will receive awards today, because in the midst of many of these conditions, you were also able to consistently attend to the hard and often disruptive work of learning and growing, of meeting high expectations, and of doing the creative and constructive work that was required of you. We honor your attention to the tasks and skills valued in this setting and pray that they will serve you well as you continue on your journey as peacemakers, justice seekers, and waymakers in the beautiful and broken world outside of our community. May we all commit ourselves to practices of honoring all those that we meet, not because they rise to our lofty expectations, but because they are beloved of God, because they are experiencing injustices that we didn't have to struggle through, because systems sometimes work against them, because their bodies and their spirits are worthy of honor in whatever form they take, because they simply are. May it be so.